and George Young had done, they'd gone so far as to take 5 songs from the Highway to Hell album, wipe Bond's vocals from them, record them with Alan Fryer singing them, and they'd, in a roundabout way, sort of said, we think you're good enough to do the job, and he probably thought he was going to be the next lead singer of ACDC.
When a friend got in touch with him and said, a mutual friend between ACDC and said, there's a band that would like you to audition. He said, look, I owe it to the guys to play the gig. They'll lose money if I'm, he had a club gig. They'll lose money. I can't do it, not certainly if I don't know who the band are. And the bloke said, well, I can't tell you the band's name, but I can tell you their initials. Down he came. A typical affable Geordie, as immensely friendly chap, as friendly today, after all the millions he's earned with ACDC as he was back when he joined the band and he didn't have a pot to piss in. Stardom hasn't changed him in any way. He's a really nice bloke. In fact, when he was supposed to be down for the audition, the band was sort of waiting for him, went looking and found him playing pool with the roadies.
Brian was the man, not just because of his voice, but because he fitted in so well with the rest of the band.
I think with the audition it probably settled him down a lot because they were very down to earth. He wasn't given a full list of expectations and a manner of behaving. They just accepted him as he was.
He got the best gig a singer could have, certainly at that time, and he knew he had a lot to live up to. And it's a kind of, I think it was about a 12-hour flight out to Nassau because you have to stop off in Bermuda on the way. And we played cards, and Brian is just one of the best comedians. I mean, it was just a continual stream of jokes. And we had a fantastic time. You might imagine that as we neared Nassau that Brian may be getting more and more nervous. In fact, as we neared Nassau, I think Brian was getting more and more relaxed in a number of ways.
It is the best opening track of any album ever. So it's such an ominous bell, and it says so much.
For many people, the opening song on Back in Black with its ominous tolling bell was a big surprise.
Now there's another song which I always relate to that, and it's Black Sabbath by Black Sabbath, except there's a more mournful tone about Hell's Bells by ACDC as compared to the ominous tone of the Black Sabbath bell. And most people believe that it has a certain connection with Bon Scott. I think they may be right in terms of spiritual connection. I don't think they set out as a band, AC/DC, to write a tribute song to their late singer, but somehow there's a connection.
They also started the album with a song that would not have suited Bon's singing style.
Be it because of Mutt Lange's production or just the band direction, they were making stadium rock in a sense, and that album really kicked that off for them.
But it's got one of those great openings, not just the bell, but the riff which slowly comes in and never really drives forward. It maintains a certain stately stature, which actually makes it, if anything, even more remarkable.
Most fans of the band would not have known what Brian Johnson sounded like.
There was no internet to download any stuff off, so unless anyone had any old singles from 1973, or remembered, then all they had to go on was sort of what would have been reported in the press as to vaguely what he sounded like. Now I remember this vividly because I was at school and I'd just come over to this country from Australia, and a huge AC/DC fan, and me and all my schoolmates just so eager to hear what this new guy sounded like. The morning that album was released, raced home on my bike, and I can remember putting that album on, putting the needle down and waiting, and they teased you for a couple of minutes.
Yeah, with the Hell's Bells riff, there's this note hanging underneath all the way through, almost like a drone. So you've got the first note down, and then the other notes carry on over that. But you've got to keep that low note hanging. If your hand touches the guitar and you cut it out, it loses all its effect. It's got to be played properly. Whereas when you're playing a chord riff, it's much easier to bash it out. But there's you've got a root note in there. You have to keep returning to the root note. But then when the riff kicks in, everyone's playing along, then a new riff kicks in. So they go on to a second riff, which they don't always do. And in fact, they hardly ever do. change the theme, you know. So the new riff comes in, and it all settles down, and then the vocals come in. Beautiful.
Especially with the way Malcolm plays, he really does pull back sometimes, and it might just be minute what he does, but really if you listen to the whole song of the way it's played, for instance Hell's Bells, like he really does sit back. Malcolm's very disciplined in the way he plays. He's very tight, very pulled back and all that, and lets Angus take control.
It's not as though he comes in on a foot, you know, like Highway to Hell and he's straight in. It's such a long, ominous, almost mystical feel to it as it builds.
Because there's the bell. That in itself is like, you know, one, wow, two, okay, I understand, tribute to Bob, you know. And then Angus starts that slow, teasing sort of guitar build-up, and it keeps on going, and it builds, and the band come in, and it builds, but you still don't know what this guy sounds like, and it's like, please God, let him be good, you know. And suddenly, bang, he's in, and you're like, thank fuck for that.
A lot of singers will be like, well, I really want to go in, you know, high as hard as I possibly can, and what he did was nicely build it and hit various notes along the way rather than blowing all the cookies with the first note.
One of the main problems with recording the bell was that the key that we wanted the bell to be, or the octave rather, that we wanted the bell to be in, would have necessitated a bell twice the size of the one that we actually had. We thought about using recordings of other bells, but it was generally considered that we really should have a specific recording of a bell because we could control that best of all. So towards the end of the period in Nassau, there were a couple of backing vocals that needed to be done, and I then flew back to England to record the bell, or to record a bell, because the bell that had been commissioned wasn't ready. So they arranged for us to record a bell in a church tower in Loughborough, near where the Bell Foundry was. So I pitched up with the what was then the Manor Mobile on the appointed morning to record this, and we set microphones up in the bell tower. And we very quickly found there was a huge problem. Bell towers also have birds living in them, and every time we hit the bell, the first sound you heard was the fluttering of 250 birds flying off into the Leicestershire skies. So we had to scrap that particular way of doing it. I then talked to the people at the Bell Foundry, and they reckoned that within the next 2 days they could get the actual bell ready for us. So we suspended the bell in the Bell Foundry, and I thought it would be really cool to have the guy who made the bell hit the bell. We then had to take this multitrack, we chose the best hit of the bell, we then did a mix of that using all of the microphone sources that we felt were best, and we then slowed that down to half speed, which naturally takes it down exactly 1 octave, and that was the recording that we used.
ACDC were one of the first rock bands to employ the use of large props and gimmicks as part of their live shows, and the bell was to become one of their